The average age of the world's great civilizations has been 200 years. These nations progress from bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance back to selfishness, from selfishness to complacency, from complacency to apathy, from apathy to dependency, from dependency back again to bondage. In 16 years, the United States will be 200 years old. Is this cycle inevitable? The answer depends on you. You are the light of the world.
Insight. The religious principles underlying American democracy. The fundamental connection between faith and freedom.
How do you do? My name's Father Kieser. Today we're going to talk about the most important individual in the world. We're going to talk about you, and about what you can do to strengthen the American way of life. That we need strengthening, I think, is pretty apparent. We are attacked from outside by a vicious and clever enemy. Communism threatens our American freedoms, and it seeks to undermine all we hold dear. And yet I don't think our greatest problem is communism, for we are attacked from within. Moral corruption can eat away the heart of a nation. It can sap our spiritual strength. It can weaken our moral fiber. I think we have more to fear from the decline of Christian morality than we do from Russian missiles. I have here a book that may shock you. It talks about the death of a nation. Let me read a portion to you. The first cause, the rapid increase of divorce, the undermining of the dignity and sanctity of the home, which is the basis of human society. Second, higher and higher taxes, spending of public money for free bread and circuses for the populace. Third, the mad craze for pleasure, sports becoming more exciting and brutal. Fourth, the building of gigantic armaments when the real enemy was within, the decadence of the people. Fifth, the decay of religion, faith fading into mere form, losing touch with life, and becoming impotent to guide the people. Does that sound familiar? Does it sound like a description of our civilization today? It wasn't intended to be. But I think we can take the parallel seriously. What I have just read to you is the famous historian's Edward Gibbon's explanation for the decline and fall of the Roman Empire.
Is the United States a weakening, softening, decaying nation? In the Korean War, hundreds of thousands of Americans proved in bravery that this was not so. Day after day, heroes were born and died here, as in every struggle for man's freedom. And yet, across the vast battleground of American courage, certain Americans began to seem unsure about the values and strength of their heritage. Communist propaganda seized on this.
Prisoner of War Camp Number 5, People's Republic of North Korea. From our observations of American soldier prisoners, these facts are evidenced. The American soldier has weak loyalty to his family, his country, his religion, and to his fellow soldier. His concepts of right and wrong are hazy. Opportunism is easy. By himself, he feels frightened and insecure. He underestimates his own work, his own strength, his own ability to survive.
As usual, the communists had exaggerated the few Americans they broke into the majority who remained loyal to their nation and ideals. In rehabilitation centers, Army psychiatrists found that those soldiers who had a strong faith and devotion to their church, their families, a knowledge of United States history and traditions, these men came through undaunted. And yet, the few who faltered from the American ideal, whose responsibility were they? Their families, their churches, their schools, their governments?
That's a difficult question to answer. I've often asked myself, whose fault is it? I just don't know. I was in the war, and I've traveled a lot. I've seen how people in other countries live. You know, we're awfully lucky in America to be free, to live in a prosperous economy. There's nothing like it. And yet, sometimes when I look around me, I wonder what's happening to Americans. What's wrong with us? Everywhere you look, it seems people are rotting at the core. Is it my imagination, or is it true?
From the Catholic Bishops of the United States, 1961, quote, "The evidences of our moral decline are everywhere to be seen. In the alarming increase in crime, particularly among the young, in the sensational treatment of violence and sexuality in literature, on the stage, screen, and television, in the disclosures of greed and cynicism in government, labor, and business, in the stubborn continuance in race prejudice and injustice, in the multiplication of divorce and in the rapid disintegration of the family, in a harsh and pagan disregard of the sacredness of human life concealed under the mantle of science." End of quote. From J. Edgar Hoover, quote, "In some circles, I regret to say that the word patriotism has become a dirty word, and belief in God old-fashioned, if not ridiculous. Some educational institutions have been duped into permitting underhanded attacks to be made on democratic institutions and officials of government by instructors responsible for the higher education of our young people. We have heard about America with our ears, but not with our hearts. In an era of materialistic selfishness, the crime rate is increasing approximately 9% a year. Our national moral strength has slipped seriously when we find our youngsters substituting idolatry of hoodlums and thugs for admiration of heroes, patriots, and sports. Public apathy and ignorance continue to allow the pornographic literature racket to make profits of $500 million a year. In 1 week of television in one area, 3,696 acts of violence were recorded, including 1,261 agonizing deaths through shootings, beatings, and other violence. The explosive danger to society from this excessive violence is obvious. The stabilizing force of religion is needed more today than ever before. A child who has been taught to respect the laws of God will have little difficulty respecting the laws of man. Our nation today needs leaders and citizens of unusual vigor and foresight. America can rise no higher than the individuals who walk her streets, conduct her business, teach her young, make her homes, and attend her churches.
See what I mean? Every place you look, at the schools, at business, at the kids growing up, you wonder, things are not as they should be. It wasn't this way when I was growing up. A man's word was his bond then. You could always depend on it. When a man said he'd do a job for you, he did it. And you could be sure it would be well done. Men took pride in their work then. They took pride in themselves. Now they just don't seem to care. Oh, I know we have a lot more now. TV and cars and automatic dishwashers. We're rich on the outside. But I'm afraid we're getting poorer on the inside. That's bad. I've thought about this a great deal. I've asked myself, what can I do about this downhill slide? What has caused it?
I think we have to look for the explanation in the religious realm. If the American people are declining, it can only be because they have renounced the foundation of morality. I mean God. Here in this country, we have always been convinced that religion and morality go together. That over the long haul, Only God can motivate a man to act morally. After all, Congress can make the laws, but only God can make a man want to obey them. Personal moral responsibility grows strong in the soil of religious faith. Separated from that soil, it can only wither and die. When the individual realizes that he will be judged by a loving God for each and every one of his acts, he will be less likely to take those acts for granted or to shrug them off. He will begin to take responsibility for them because he has somebody to whom he can be responsible. I am afraid too many of the American people have lost their awareness of their relationship to God. Religion for them has become a social rather than a spiritual affair. Church is just someplace you go and visit on Sunday morning. And so they live their lives as if God did not exist. The result can only be a decline in morality. As Dostoevsky says, if there is no God, then anything is permissible. The American way of life is based upon the dignity of the individual. Why are you important? You are important because you have a mind that can know, that can discover the law of God written into your very nature. A mind that can distinguish clearly between right and wrong. And you are important because you have a will that's free, that can enable you to choose between right and wrong. Freedom is your greatest power because it makes you like God. But it's not enough to possess this dignity. You must use it. You must use your mind to govern your life in accordance with reason. You must use your freedom in order to love. What does this mean to us today in the United States? I have here a coin of our country. On one side, in God we trust. In other words, our obligation to God, to love Him, to serve Him, to obey Him. And on the other side, e pluribus unum, from the many one, or is translated, all for one and one for all. In other words, our obligation to our fellow Americans. Each American is responsible to every other American. And any single American who reneges on that responsibility, who fails to act as a citizen under God, who cheats or lies or who degrades himself or others, is eroding the very foundation of our American democracy.
I follow your reasoning all right. It all sounds fine in theory, but I tried it. It just doesn't seem to work. If you live according to those principles, you get murdered, that's all. Murdered by the system. Murdered by the people around you. Why should I be honest about my income tax returns? Nobody else is. Why should I tell the truth in my expense account? Nobody else does. There's one fellow in our plant nobody likes. I don't know why. I try to be nice to him. I made a point of eating lunch with him when nobody else would. You know what happened? The other guys gave me the horse laugh. One time at this plant we had a machine to make. When I looked at the finished product, I could see it wasn't right. Oh, it worked okay, but we had to cut corners and the workmanship was sloppy. I told the boss I'd do the whole thing over myself. You know what he said to me? Don't be difficult, Joe. Just get the work out, that's all. I tell you, I have to live in this world. I have a family to support. I've got to get along. I want that promotion. The fellow has a right to security. We all want that. If I have to conform to get it, then I'm ready to conform. What else can I do?
As a historian and sociologist, I think I can explain that problem in terms of America's growth. Since the day of the frontier, personal responsibility and initiative have been our strongest American characteristics. Because of stout-hearted individuals, our worthy national goals have been achieved. This force of individuals has led us to a great human welfare, not as a result of environment, but because of men who made environment. And yet, as we grew bigger and bigger as a nation, forces came in calling for greater and greater reliance, not on the individual,
but on groups, collectivity. You say, a man wants his security. Well, of course he does, and he's entitled to it. But, and this is the danger, these exaggerated demands for benefits, most easily secured by the force of pressure groups, have led an ever greater number of our people to relinquish their rights and abdicate their responsibilities. And this creates a spiral of more demands and more pressures, and an ever-increasing infringement on personal freedom and responsibility. As Pope John has said, does it follow that the process of socialization is impossible to control, and that increasing constantly it will one day surely reduce men to the role of automatons? Certainly not. For socialization is not the result of forces of nature acting according to determination that cannot be changed. It is the work of man, of a free being, conscious of and responsible for his acts.
In other words, you as an individual are our greatest national asset. You are of crucial importance because you are responsible for your own acts. And no group or no social situation can absolve you of that responsibility. It is a perverse kind of morality which permits the individual to alter or abandon his principles in accordance with circumstance. After all, right is right if nobody's right, and wrong is wrong if everybody's wrong. The American who says, I'll play the game regardless of the laws, I'll do whatever's expected of me, is a near responsible American. He's letting down his fellow citizens. But let's take a look at some examples. At a businessman, for instance. Can a business opportunity absolve him of his responsibilities morally?
Certainly it could. Take this situation. We were going to put out a new product, beat the competition. Well, I fixed it so we destroy the competition. I knew this was good for the corporation, and it brought me a vice presidency. That's all that mattered. Getting more security. What if I did act immorally to accomplish it?
As a union organizer in this critical defense project, I figured my first responsibility was to the union. It'd be good for the union, for me personally, if we could employ a lot of men on this project. So we set up phony jobs, feather beds. Seemed to me that we'd better take the money or somebody else would grab it. I rigged the deal for what it would mean to me in terms of promotion. I figured I'd never have to answer to anybody for it.
As a high school teacher, I'm guilty of turning out organizational men and women. I guess I'm one of them, in fact. It's the organizational type who is favored and advanced instead of the responsible individual. Therefore, when we established our new grading system here, I saw nothing wrong in endorsing it. I didn't want to oppose the principal or faculty or stand up for unpopular beliefs. So I'm guilty of creating even more automatons under this system. Bland, dull boys and girls who are graded not on their individual initiative, but only on how well they adjust to the group, only on their mediocrity.
There are individuals in America that talk that way. But fortunately, they're not typical. For the vast majority of Americans, they try to order their life in accordance with God's will. The law of God must be the yardstick against which everything else is judged. And when we face a decision, the final question must be, what does God want here? Not what are other people doing or what will net me the most. Modern life takes us into many organizations. And within bounds, loyalty to these organizations is a good thing. But we must never allow our participation in these organizations to submerge our individuality, to blunt our sense of moral responsibility, or to prevent us from thinking for ourselves. In fact, the very reverse must be the case. Because you are not only responsible for your own acts, but you're responsible for the acts of those organizations of which you are a member. The policies of your corporation, the practices of your labor union, the laws of your government are your responsibility. And you are obliged to do what you can to govern them in accordance with Christian principles. Now, I know this isn't easy. But Christ said it wasn't going to be easy to be a Christian. He said, I have not come to bring peace upon the earth, but the sword. Have you taken hold of that sword? The sword of truth and justice? Do you use it to cut away corruption and immorality, apathy and ignorance? Let's look now at what some people are doing in order to strengthen the American way of life.
Frankly, as an elected representative, I wish more people would bring the sword to their duties as citizens. For instance, how well do each of you know the men who represent you in government? Have you ever taken the trouble to even learn their names? Or even further, to write them one word of encouragement? Have you ever taken the time and the trouble to study the great issues which affect the lives of not only yourself and your children? Do you make your own views known? Well, you must. Or do you just expect some remote George to handle everything for you, and you try to bury your head in the sand and hope that this old world will rock along without you? You know, at the Battle of Lexington, a Minuteman said, "My son, that which I bequeath you, you must own anew, if you would keep it." And Abe Lincoln said, "As a nation of free men, we must live for all time, or die by suicide." Suicide of a nation takes place when the people don't care anymore, when they renounce their responsibilities as citizens.
As a corporation executive, I see my duty very clearly now. I will stand up for right and truth as I see it under God, regardless of corporate ethics, injured feelings, or personal security, even if it might cost me my job.
My job is to secure the most benefits for the men I represent, but not at the price of greed or dishonest work half done. We'll either do it honestly, equitably for all parties, or I wash my hands of representing such an organization.
At times it will be unpopular, and at times it will hurt. But now I feel a sacred responsibility to those I teach, to reward initiative and not bland conformity, to create students who are not afraid to work, to learn how to think for themselves, because only then will they know how priceless it is to be free. Only then will they be able to defend their freedom from the ever-increasing pressures of groups.
Funny thing, I guess we're all alike. A few minutes ago I was sitting here, moaning how bad everything was in this country. So easy to do that. And yet, what was I really doing? I was blaming the other people, blaming them for our spiritual tailspin, blaming kids for juvenile delinquency, blaming management for unfair business practices, blaming the unions for corruption, blaming government for inefficiency and graft. Always I was blaming someone else. It's very easy to condemn the other fellow. It's much more difficult to exercise initiative, assume responsibility, and hold out for principle, even if that means bucking the whole crowd. And yet, that's the only way the problem is going to be solved. I've got 3 kids, so juvenile delinquency is my problem. I have to do what I can about it. I'm a member of a union. I have to take an interest in all its activities and help shape its policies. The boss sometimes asks for suggestions. I should give him some intelligent ones. And I'm a citizen. This is my country. I'm a part owner of my government. I have to follow its affairs and vote accordingly. In the past, I've done plenty of griping about the situation. But what have I done to remedy it? Very little, I'm afraid. I took the easy way out. I was always too busy. It was easier just to complain, or to say, what can I do? It's too big a problem for me.
That's the perennial question. What can the individual do? What can you do? And it's so easy to run away from that question, or to say, I can't do anything. But the truth is, there's much you can do. There's much you alone can do. You can start by examining yourself. Are you living the kind of life God wants you to live? Is there present anything in your life that interferes with your friendship with God? Are you giving to other people the justice and charity which is their due? Are you fulfilling God's purpose in your life? Are you strong enough to stand on your own 2 feet and stand out for principle regardless of the cost? You will be surprised at the tremendous influence you can have upon other people when you once make up your mind to live the kind of life God wants you to live. One individual with purpose, with conviction, is worth hundreds of thousands who sit by in ignorance and apathy. You are the light of the world. Don't hide that light under a bushel, but let it shine before men. Is it too much for one individual to reach for the stars? To try to change the world? I don't think so. This country was built by great individuals, and it will be saved by great individuals. By individuals like you. What we need, are men like those described by Pope Pius XII. Men proud of their dignity and their equality with their fellow creatures. Men solidly attached to their land and their traditions. How do you stack up? Are you ready to allow the American tradition of freedom to follow the so-called inevitable cycle back to bondage? Or are you ready to go forth as a Christian individual, thinking for yourself, assuming responsibility, exercising initiative, following moral principle regardless of the cost involved? If we go forth, we will surely change the world. If we do not, we will surely die and perish. Dead as the empty monuments of the past. You are the light of the world. Show it. Use it.
Insight is a production of the Paulist Fathers, a group of Catholic priests who serve their nation as witnesses to the religious truth which underlies American freedom.